Hey there, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. This morning, the Seattle Kraken have one player, but by tonight, they're going to have a full roster, and they'll be on the way to their first NHL season. Fans are waiting to cheer them on. In a minute, how to build a hockey team from scratch. But first, let's get you caught up. The sweet, sweet smell of summer rain was just lovely, but technically not enough to end Seattle's dry spell. Yes, it rained yesterday, barely, but the National Weather Service says we still haven't had measurable rainfall in more than 30 days. That's because Seattle's official rainfall gets measured at SeaTac Airport, which is 12 miles south of the Space Needle. Anyway, we still got a ways to go to break the current no rain at the airport record of 55 days. Here's hoping we don't do that. WashDOT is shutting down 2 encampments along I-90 after someone threw rocks at another 7 cars just yesterday. The state patrol says 3 of those drivers stayed around, including a semi-driver who chased the suspect, a 31-year-old Seattle man who was then arrested. A camp near the Mount Baker Tunnel and another by the Rainier Ave off-ramp will be cleared and fenced off tomorrow. At least 1 arrest has been linked to those spots. There have been more than 200 reports of rock-throwing incidents in King County since January. And after briefly stopping by space on Blue Origin's debut passenger flight, Jeff Bezos is back on Earth today and feeling grateful.
I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer because you guys paid for all of this. So seriously, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
The price tag was about $5.5 billion if you go by how much money Bezos has put into Blue Origin since he founded it. Tickets for a trip to space will go for a few $100,000. Hey, maybe Prime members will get a discount. Seattle is getting a new pro sports team. The Seattle Kraken's debut NHL season will start in October. The team is almost done building the arenas, but as of right now, there's no roster. It's a rare opportunity to start from scratch. I think that's a good thing. I don't know. KUOW producer Clare McGrane is here to tell us what it takes to make an NHL team. Clare, great to talk to you.
Hey, Trish. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for taking on this assignment. Are you a big hockey fan?
No, I am not a big hockey fan at all. In fact, prior to the last few weeks, I knew nothing about hockey, to be totally honest. But that's why I was interested in doing this, is because I like the Sounders. Been to a number of Seahawks-Mariners games in my time. And recently I started getting into basketball because a friend of mine is really into the Storm. So I like watching sports. I like rooting for Seattle sports teams. And I, after doing some research, am really excited to go root for the Kraken someday.
Fantastic. Well, a new NHL team is obviously a big deal for the city, but we used to have a pro hockey team, right? Tell me about the history of hockey here.
Totally. So not only did we have a pro hockey team, we had a really good pro hockey team back in the early 20th century. They were called the Seattle Metropolitans, founded in 1915. And in their first 5 years, they went to the Stanley Cup final 3 times. So they were distinctly good. We were even the first team to win it in 1917. And then less than 10 years after they were founded, they folded in the 1920s because they didn't have a place to play anymore. And I can hear all the Sonics fans kind of groaning as I say that. But today there is still a strong hockey culture in Seattle, despite the fact that we don't have a pro team and haven't for 100 years. I talked to Tim Pipes about this. He is the owner of the Angry Beaver in Greenwood, which is Seattle's hockey bar. He's a transplant from Toronto. His team is the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he talked to me a lot about the culture of hockey in Seattle.
What I was really surprised about with hockey in Seattle, because this is not a city of snow and ice, is how much history there was from the Totems to the Ironmen. These weren't pro teams, they were sort of just below the pros, but I mean it was still big league hockey back then, and even currently, after I've opened this bar, I've seen dozens of Thunderbird games and dozens of Everett Silvertip games, so the culture is actually very, very rich here.
And he mentioned the Silvertips and the Thunderbirds. They play in Everett and Kent, respectively, and they have huge followings around the city.
So hockey really is alive and well in the area, Claire. We just haven't had a pro team in 100 years.
Exactly. But that is changing.
Pretty cool. So today is a big day, right? The Kraken are announcing who they've picked in their expansion draft. What the heck is an expansion draft?
Well, a few different leagues will do expansion drafts. I'm just going to talk about the NHL one because that's the one I know best at this point. An expansion draft is where you steal players from other teams. We don't have any players. They have players. We're just going to take them. So each team gets to... Yes, very. Starting off a bit aggressive, honestly. But, maybe that's setting the tone. So we get to take one player from each of the other teams in the NHL, apart from the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who are the newest team. So tonight at Gasworks Park, the Kraken front office and a bunch of famous folks, largely sports figures from around the city, are going to go through the roster and go, okay, the Jersey Devils, we'll take this guy. The Penguins, we'll take this guy. And the teams get to protect a certain number of players, but they only get to protect so many. And the interesting thing to me about this is technically the Kraken isn't supposed to talk to the players about this. They're supposed to find out at the same time as everyone else. So it's going to be a really interesting experience to see all these players from other parts of the country that are going to be coming to Seattle.
So what kind of players are we going to get out of this if the NHL teams are already allowed to protect their favorites?
Great question. So I actually went to Greg Wyshynski to answer this question. He is the senior NHL writer at ESPN. And it used to be that players you would get were not great.
The way it used to be was you come into the league and you are expected to be god-awful for at least 2 or 3 seasons. You were getting the absolute dregs of each team. The fourth line guys, the reserve defensemen, the worst goalies. You were just expected to be horrible.
But then the league thought, it costs a lot to join the NHL. Like Seattle and the owners of the Kraken, they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into this expansion. So maybe they should be good. Maybe it would be nice to get people excited about a good team that's entering the league. So they changed the rules so that teams can protect less players. So these rules actually went into effect for the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who joined up in 2015. And they went to the Stanley Cup final in their very first year, which pre this happening would have been unthinkable. Here is Greg again.
The Vegas Golden Knights didn't necessarily build a Stanley Cup finalist through the expansion draft. They built it because other teams freaked out about losing players and made these little side deals that allowed the Golden Knights to get exponentially better players than they would have had otherwise. So when you look at Seattle, their success or failure could be how well they leverage that pressure to get better players from teams. And then the other side of that coin is maybe they don't because the teams are smarter now than they were the first time they went through this with Vegas.
So Vegas set this really high bar, and I think a lot of the teams, as Greg said, might be looking at what happened with Vegas and going, maybe we didn't need to make such a good deal. So it's going to be really interesting how the Kraken use this political power to put their team together.
Wow, fascinating. So, Claire, we'll have a roster of players soon, but what about the fans? Because I heard that guy from the Angry Beaver, he already has his team. A team isn't just the people actually playing the game. It's a lot more than that.
Right. So a lot of people moved to Seattle. We're a city of transplants. They moved here from wherever. But Tim says that is actually a really positive thing for the Kraken.
You're a fan of whoever you're a fan of, whether it's Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or, looking around my room, any of these teams that are on the wall, they've moved to Seattle, whether it's for work or just to get away from where they're from. And now they've got a second team to root for.
So that idea of having a second team to root for, I think, is really big. Tim's a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're honestly not great, so he said he's excited for a second team that maybe will be better. But all those kind of expat fans of different teams he thinks will be really full-throated fans of the Kraken. And it'll be a situation where, they have the season tickets, they're wearing their jerseys around, they love the Kraken, except when their team is in town, and then they'll root for their team when they're visiting. And another interesting thing about the Angry Beaver is just how passionate people are about this place. I was really surprised. And the thing that stood out to me talking to Tim is during the pandemic, they had a really difficult time. You know, this is a place where people come to gather together and watch hockey games, or a lot of Canadian expats will come for Canadian holidays. But it's not a place where you're necessarily going to go for the takeout food. And so they were having a really hard time. Yeah. And their community came together and started a GoFundMe and raised $45,000 to keep the bar running.
I mean, to raise that kind of money just through the kindness of people, how much they want this bar to stick around, how much it's meant to everybody, it was mind-blowing. So I know we're here to stay at this point. I know that, after what I've gone through, we're here to stay.
Wow. Clearly, sports fans appreciate the angry beaver, Claire, but Seattle already has 4 pro sports teams right now. The Kraken is going to be number 5, and we're still chomping at the bit to get an NBA team back here. Where will the Kraken fit into Seattle's sports landscape?
Yeah, Tim said something really interesting about this, that hockey has a lot of the best parts of a lot of sports that are already represented in pro sports in Seattle. If you like people kind of running into each other and the physicality of football and you're a Seahawks fan, that kind of translates well to the NHL. There's a lot of similar play as basketball or soccer, where it's about passes and running up and down the field and so on. But I think it is a really interesting question of how they're going to fit into the sports teams we already know and love. Because, the Mariners aren't necessarily good and haven't been for a very long time.
I didn't want to bring it up.
I know, but we love the Mariners, right? They're not a great team, but they're our team. The Seahawks obviously are much beloved. And interestingly, similar to the Seahawks, there's this huge catchment area around the Pacific Northwest in the upper left corner where other than, the Canadian teams, there aren't that many pro hockey teams. So I think that is going to be kind of difficult for the Kraken. People have their primary team that they're really into. Maybe they go to a Mariners game every now and again, but they're mostly a Sounders fan. Or they go to a Seahawks game every now and again, but they're mostly a Storm fan. And that's a lot of competition for a new team. I think that is a big challenge for them, figuring out where they fit into this city.
Yeah. And Claire, it's obvious that sports are personal and fans are fickle. I wonder if you learned anything about Seattle through all of this.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, I think, is that despite all those concerns about the number of teams we have here, it's a crowded market, the NHL decided, no, there is room for a hockey team here. And a lot of folks that I spoke to said they think the Kraken coming is really kind of a harbinger of the NBA returning, like you mentioned up top. The Climate Pledge Arena is designed to be a hockey arena, but also to be eventually a basketball arena. And the thing that it really showed me about Seattle, I think, is that we are a big city. We're no longer like this little city tucked away in the corner that people kind of forget about. We're major. We're on the national stage when it comes to all these different things. And I was just really struck by how high profile Seattle is going to be in the NHL with this expansion. And then the fact that there are enough people moving here or enough money floating around here that the NHL believed this was a good idea.
Well, it all happens starting tonight at 5 o'clock. It's on television. Seattle Now producer Clare McGrane on assignment once again. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Trish.
Thanks for listening today. You can follow us on Instagram at Seattle Now Pod. Clare McGrane produced today's show. Our production team is Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Jason Pagano, and Diana Opong. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.